What? Hello, humans. Hello, humans. Uh-oh. Oops. I always do that. These damn tubes. Anyway. Okay, so let's see. All right. So this is the way to go. This is the way to proceed. I'm going to have to turn my back, but I'll keep talking. It's working and shit. Okay, so we'll do it this way. I had basically nothing to do other than recover in late 2018 and into 2019. And I had been, because of the situation, I'd gotten pissed at David Wilcock and Corey Good. Corey Good ended up suing me. I hired attorneys. I hired an attorney who led me through to two other attorneys, to one who took the case, and then he had other interns on it. They didn't do squat. I fired them all and took it on pro se and won my case through dismissal, right? They threw me out. The judge said, no, you don't belong here, get the fuck out. And so I did, quite happy. Anyway, so during that period of time, as I say, I was somewhat pissed off at Corey Good and David Wilcock. And so I had nothing better to do in the recovery process. Most of it happens at night. I had wasted down in the body so much and had so much to build back that I really couldn't strain the body too much during the day and do stuff other than regular routine things. And I had to do the exercises, and then I had to recover that night and so on. It's tedious to be in recovery because you have to occupy the mind as well. So what I did was to write this sitcom, a situation comedy for TV, okay? And it was called Woo Woo Land. And I thought it was really funny. Basically, it was a lampooning of David Wilcock and Corey Good, because I was irritated, right? And it was fucking funny. Anyway, it would never, ever, ever be made because of woke Hollywood, and it's totally not woke, and it's funny because it's totally not woke. Anyway, though, in the Woo Woo Land, which is about a cable TV news channel that employs these two doofy characters. In that one of the episodes, in the background, you see a TV show featured in that's also on their network, and it's a sort of a soap opera, right? And it's called The Tides of Woo. so anyway, so that's why I used it here, because this is appropriate, right? So we have to discuss something here, because everybody hears the phrase "the tide has turned," right? And you'll hear people repeat it over and over and over again, and then lots of people say, "Okay, well, I don't see fucking shit," So these guys are nutty. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. And so here's what we have to understand. So let's see. Okay, so this represents a beach and at high tide, okay? And so what we're discussing is called the rule of twelfths. This is one of these rules that you extract from nature by observing the woo, and then as you extract that rule, because we understand how nature works, how the materium is structured, and how woo is presented to us, we know this is not an exactitude. Just like gravity is not an exactitude, just like the drop off in energy by a quarter of the square, right? As you go forward. It's not exact, it's an approximate. And much of universe, all of universe that presents itself to us in the materium is not exact. We can measure very precise, but universe will not replicate precision that we find in one place in another place with that same effect necessarily. So we're left wondering what's going on, and then we see that we can extract a rule of approximations. All right, so this is a rule of twelfths. Now, bear in mind something. We're talking about tides here for a minute. Tides vary throughout the planet. So Finland has very little tides because it's up on the top. Or Antarctica the same, although Antarctica has different influences and more depth of tides than Finland will because of the nature of the ocean. So a lot of things affect tides. Tides are not equal in terms of the amount of time that they take. And so here on the Pacific coast, we have tides that run about 12 hours and 15 minutes up to 13 hours and 50 minutes, depending on where you're measuring that tidal influence at. So it can vary by an hour over the course of the half of a day. Now, within the tides, you can sit there on some beaches. This is a very steep beach, okay? And on some beaches, you would see that a very large loss of water as the tide goes out. And so in this particular thing, the 12 down here, this represents the point of low tide. And so here we are at mean high tide, and here we are at mean low tide. All right, and so our beach actually goes on down like this and runs on out. All right. But this is a very steep beach for our particular discussion here. The beach I live on is this kind of a line stretched way the hell out. It's very, 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 very flat. So it wouldn't be, it'd be too difficult to use that kind of beach as an illustration here. But here's what happens in tides. There's this rule of twelfths. It's an approximation. And so we're looking at a movement of water, so it's hard to discern how much has moved and so on unless we measure it against the fixed point of the land, right? And so people have been measuring tides forever by putting sticks and poles in there. And so they would drive a pole down in here, and then they'd put measuring marks for each of the every foot or whatever it is that we have going on up, right? And so they discovered that that the tide takes, as I say, we'll just say that it takes 12 hours, okay? Now, we have what are known as diurnal tides, right? 2 tides a day. In a tidal flow, there are 2 actions, the outflow and then the inflow. So within each tidal flow of 12 hours, we have the 2 actions. The flow out and the ebb in. Technically, when the tide turns, for a sailor or someone sitting on the shore that's doing observation, there is what's known as the pause. And that's where you can't discern which way the tide is going. Depending on where you're at, it might last 15, 20 minutes visually. It's usually not. In some places like the Bay of Fundy, you're going to get because it's so steep and has such huge tidal bores and tidal rips, in some of these places along the Chinese coast, you're going to get this weird effect that the tide will rush in and then instantly start to turn and go back, and there's no apparent pause because of where you're located further on up inland. And the effects of the tide moving water in and out of basically river basins. However, so we have the flow, the ebb, and the pause. Now here's the thing about tides. They're not, all of nature is asymmetric. So even though we have, so we've got a 12-hour tide, and it's going to move all of this amount of water out to reach the mean low tide, and then it's going to move all this amount of water back in to reach the mean high tide. But it doesn't do it in an even fashion, because it does, but not in an even way that you would anticipate, right? Okay, so we've got a 12-hour cycle for this whole flow out with the pause and then the whole flow back in. So it's got to move this whole thing in 12 hours, and here's how it does it. So in the first hour, it moves this band. So that goes out in number 1. And so in the first band, 1/12 is moved. So the top, now this is, okay, so it doesn't really actually happen this way because there's water churning and all of this, and you can't have a static thing as it flows out. This, bear in mind that this is a metaphor, this is an analogy or a description that, and a model for thinking about it that is close to reality as we can get with our approximations and is illustrative of the point, right? And so in the first hour, we have 1/12 move. Now, it's got to move all of this mass in 6 hours because it's got to do it in 1/2 of 12. So in the second hour, it's going to move 2/12. And then in the third hour, it's going to move 3/12. And so, so the dramatic part of this is that if you're sitting there on a boat in basically 3 hours, you're going to go zoop down to here. Okay, so so you would notice that, but maybe you'd notice this if it were a steep enough beach in 1 hour, but you're really going to notice it by the third hour. And so in the way of this is that in these 6 hours of the flow out, and then in the fourth hour, you're going to move 3/12 as well. And then in the fifth hour, you're going to move 2/12. And then in the last hour, the sixth hour out, you're going to move that last 12. So there's not much happening down here. And then you'll have another pause, okay? And then the tide will start flowing back in, and it will repeat this on the inflow. And so the dramatic part of a tide turning is like, who cares, really? The dramatic part of the tide is in the middle of the flow, either way. Because here we have, in these 2 hours, the third hour and the fourth hour, we move 1/2 of that entire mass. So tides are in that sense asymmetric, right? Because in the other 4 hours, we move the other half, so it's spread out. So we have this bulging effect in tides, very much the same kind of bulging effect you find occurring in clock springs, anything that has a natural form of resistance, bows and arrows. So you pull it back. There's a sort of a rule of 12th in shooting your bow, and you get, this is why compound bows are mechanically engineered to overcome this, because in a regular recurve or even a longbow, but basically in all kinds of bows other than compounds, you get this sort of rule of 12ths and pulling it back, and there's this point where you've got maximum pull, and that's usually the point where you extend that to meet the length of the arrow, and so you've got to hold it at this maximum level here. And you know, if you could, and what they do with the mechanical compounding of the gears and so on is to get you to hold the entire tension at a lower level of actual pause, so to speak, right? And so compounding block and tackle, which is basically what's inside a compound bow, attached to the spring of the arms, that spring mechanism, it exhibits a rule of 12th. And we see the same thing with regular block and tackles, like for hauling any heavy weight. You'll have this same kind of an effect hauling these up in a compound block and tackle with stiff rope. Anyway though, so this is the issue relative to the tide turning. That when the tide turns at either end, it's not going to be that very dramatic. But as it creeps forward and you get into the third and the fourth hour, either way, that's when the drama comes on in, and that's when everything becomes very visible. So now, in my way of thinking, relative to the war against the bug, we've had the tide we've had the tide turn, right? The tide's coming in. It's bringing back in all of the energy and everything that had been wasted by the bug and the evil minions. But we've just now passed the pause of the tide turning. And so if you were an astute language observer, you could observe the outflow and then the pause, and now there's this inflow relative to language, relative to winning in a social media-based info war. In any event, though, so all right, so now you've been, so now you understand, all right? The tides don't just go out in big chunks. They go out in a smooth but asymmetric way. And if we look at this asymmetric way of how the tide flows out, we end up finding that universe replicates these basic bell curves, right? It wants to do a basic bell curve in a lot of things like this. Again, also reminiscent of a bow. So there's all of these design patterns that flow through the woo here, even from tides to how humans do things relative to storing energy for hunting or whatever target practice in springs, etc. Right? So this is very much in a very real sense. This is esoteric knowledge. Now, let's see. So esoteric I really bitch about a lot of these translations, but esoteric is defined usually along the lines of known by a select group or group knowledge, that kind of thing, right? So it's an esoteric knowledge, and most people would think of it, as maybe it's like, magic. Maybe they'll associate it with that. Maybe they'll associate it with a specialized skill. Maybe they'll associate it with the term meaning particular jargons and so on. But really, what we're talking about here in terms of esoteric, okay, as in alteration, teric, I won't go into any of that, but anyway, esoteric, it refers to initiation. And so esoteric knowledge is knowledge that you have by way of initiation. Now, it could be as bland as an initiation as getting a book and reading it. So you have esoteric knowledge about the Wizard of Oz because you read the book Wizard of Oz. But your esoteric knowledge, your acquired internal understanding of the knowledge that is in Wizard of Oz is very limited because you've just looked at that source material. If, on the other hand, you had esoteric knowledge about the Wizard of Oz because you had been trained to examine the text of the Wizard of Oz book and look at the images in the Wizard of Oz movie, which differ greatly, and apply those to two different contexts. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Wizard of Oz for a second here. And so we're going to examine our esoteric knowledge, and we see that if you looked at the Wizard of Oz, and that Wizard of Oz, you looked at it within the nature of the content, you would be presented with one form of knowledge. If, on the other hand, you had been educated to something about that, then maybe you would go and look at the imagery and everything relative to the 1930s, or 20s and 30s, and economic wars against the central banks and communism. And on the other hand, if you looked at the imagery in the movies and you looked deep enough, you would see a sales message from the globalists all of those folks, and their relationship to the masses. And there's many different layers to the Wizard of Oz. Okay, the woo of the Wizard of Oz goes really deep, and you can look at it in various different ways. You can look at it in just the presentation of it against the historical background. It's hidden, right? They don't tell you that they're talking about battles between silver and gold and fiat currency and the central banks and how they're killing people and all of that sort of thing, right? And then there's you can look at it in just the presented surface thing about, the lion with no courage, et cetera, and present that, push that on humanity and get stuff out of it that way. But when they transform that into the movie, you see the shift. You see the change from the book, from the silver slippers versus the, indicating the people's money in the book being turned into the ruby slippers in the powers that be, the globalist version of it in the movies. Et cetera, right? And the flow is different. They're talking about different things entirely. They're subverting it and moving it over. So they're trying to change the woo of the Wizard of Oz to suit their particular needs. If you are savvy, if you are initiated, if you have esoteric knowledge, if you've been told how to look at it, then you see this point at which the globalists try and seize this particular message that wants to go that way and start redirecting it to our current understanding of it over here. And so you can look at all these things in these different ways relative to the woo, and woo has tides in it. It moves. Our understanding of the woo is shifted very much the same way as the tides shift. And that is that it is an approximate. We get a big bulge. We come into some esoteric knowledge, and we piggyback off of that. So we're moving more. So you can tell by your own advancement, your own process of initiation, how far you are getting into this curve of understanding. Because when you think about it, if it's a human and you're starting off on your initiation process, there's a pause. And then you decide to begin the initiation process. And then in that initiation process, you get into the first hour of it, and you start thinking, okay, I'm starting to get a little bit. And then the second hour, wow, I'm really getting a lot of it. And then the third hour, you're overwhelmed with it, and you're just trying to absorb and deal with it. Same thing with the fourth hour. And then as you start getting this level of stuff here, you become an adept. You become very adept at pulling in and absorbing this information. It's very much more calm. It's not trying to, work very hard to stay up with the flow of it. And then by the fifth hour, you start fading off into it. And so you get down into these parts of it, you're into mastery. Now, these hours might be months, they might be years, they might be decades. The time is not material to the process. The process continues. And in fact, as a woo person, you should be continuing initiation continuously on all of these. You should be keeping on with new forms of initiation, deeper, further. And that's the whole process of life here. Okay, so universe provides and guides. Okay, so universe, not particularly kind, or universe can be kind, and when that happens, we see it, and we see it in the form of people that are lucky. All right, so luck is a very odd thing if you examine it. And if you look at supposed odds and potential and these kind of things in a realistic way, you discover a great many things that the actuaries and the mathematicians do not know about change, random movements, and so on. And luck is the sign of universe exhibiting favor at a personal level. Now, it does exhibit favor at a personal level through luck for its own purposes, providing and guiding. And so you happen, for whatever reason, to be lucky at that time for that moment, however long it lasts, And then you should say to yourself, okay, universe wants me to do something, wants something to happen here, right? And so as a woo person, someone who's in the initiation process, who understands that their initiation is ongoing and they're self-initiating and so on, right? And so this is how you get esoteric knowledge, is through initiation, not through being told. You can't tell people anything. So if you try and tell people at the mundane level, you're just going to get bitch slapped and they're not going to pay any attention to you anyway. But esoteric knowledge, once you've been initiated, can't be unlearned. And so you see these things all the time. You learn to see them all, and then if you get to a certain point, you start even applying them to yourself. And so you would look at you'd examine the patterns in your life, and you'd say, all right, so why did X, Y, and Z occur in my life relative to this understanding of initiation and woo and so on? And it aids in thinking that way because it removes a lot of the seeming random cruelty that would otherwise be painted, projected onto universe from the shit that happens to humans. So as a personal example, I had cancer for 30 years in the gut that was totally undiagnosed. They couldn't find it. Even though I knew I was ill and was going to doctors and spending a fucking fortune and annoying insurance companies and all of this kind of stuff, I never gained anything until I actually got to that last day and I died of this shit and then came back. But over the course of those 30 years, universe was training me in all kinds of things about the body and external chemicals, supplements, this kind of thing that could be applied because I got nothing out of the allopaths. So I didn't pursue any of the allopathic medicine. After I died of cancer, I was reluctant to pursue it because the way that the allopaths beat you down with their associations and the fact that they control the laws and you're not allowed to speak about it. And then I discovered, I've actually survived it 3 times. I could stand up in a court of law and say I'm an expert in cancer, in surviving cancer, in this body. And you can't say shit about it. So I was able to pursue that, right? But here's the point of this. Universe has provided in me now a trained ability to ascertain within the woo things about human health and supplements and these kind of things, right? I mean, at that level. And so I find that this is now one of the things that we needed for COVID, right? Was people that knew this kind of shit. Chug a tea, right? Or chug a coffee, really. So, universe provided that. We're now coming into a period of time where the nature of the war against the globalists is going to escalate. So they know the tide has turned, and they're freaking out about it. And they're trying to do everything they can, like that king, I can't think of his name now, to stand out there and tell the tide, no, 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 get back, get back. It ain't going to work. But they're going to keep doing that. In the process of doing that, they're going to pollute all kinds of information and so on and try and create as much fear because they control you only with fear as they possibly can. And so now we find that their next escalation in this fear thing is they're going to throw smallpox at us. So you can see down here, the reason I brought this up is because here's this article from 2013, Daily Mail, discussing ancient folklore remedy using Siberian mushrooms. Aha, wonder what that could be. Could be used to treat AIDS, scientists claim. Now, that's fine. I don't care about that at the moment. But if you look down there to the second bulleted item, at the very end, you see it treats flu, HIV, and smallpox. And also it's an antiretroviral, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, that kind of thing, right? And this is from 2013. They knew this. So they knew, so the Daily Mail should have had somebody say, hey guys, didn't we run an article back when COVID popped up? Didn't we run an article back in 2000 something about this mushroom that can take out flu and all of these kind of things? You know, you would have thought the media, if they'd been doing their job, would have been promoting, just examining this idea way back in the beginning. So anyway, though, one thing to note is that they're talking about chaga and they're talking about smallpox. And so I went and I looked about smallpox. Now here, let me get back to the other. All right, so my father was what's known as a lifer. He was a career military man. He was an officer. He had a battlefield commission in the Korean War, very rare. He had a very distinguished career and went through the War College, this institution in the United States in Leavenworth, Kansas, that trains military in basically like master's degrees and PhDs in warfare, in modern warfare, right? All aspects of it. When he was there, I had nothing to do. Kansas is boring as shit, especially at that time of the year. And the libraries were raked over. They're very small, and military kids read because you're frequently in places you don't know anybody. You got nothing better to do. So a lot of military kids there with all of the officers going through the War College. And so the libraries you could always count on them being basically picked over. But so you have to do stuff. So I read a lot of the material that my dad brought home, and in those classes that he wasn't using the books and so forth, right? One of the things I read was all of the material on biological and chemical warfare. Now, here's the thing. These people are going to tell you that they've weaponized smallpox. And then you have to stop and think, oh my God, first off, you're going to get that shock. They've weaponized smallpox. Smallpox is very deadly. We know this from history. Smallpox has been eradicated with us, but nonetheless, we're still afraid of it. We've been told to be afraid of it. And they're saying that they've done something worse to it. They've weaponized it. All right, so in the War College, when I was reading all that material, they always talked about weaponizing the weapon. I mean, weaponizing the bacillus or the life form, whatever it is, would be turned into a weapon. And so the word weaponized was applied to a life form, and you were made to think, and they actually would put this into the text. And I didn't understand at the time I read this in 1967, or 66, I think. 66 maybe. Anyway, I didn't understand at the time that I read this thing about the weaponizing and it being more contagious. That's not possible. Okay, so they're actually talking about two different things. If you look in the military literature today, you can actually find a certain level of discrimination, a separation of the language about how they weaponize life forms for biological warfare. And how do I get this? Okay, so if you were good, all right, so in the ancient times we had biological warfare, right? Hannibal weaponized dogs, he weaponized elephants, and he attacked Rome with weaponized elephants and weaponized dogs. Now, the Romans also used weaponized dogs, but Hannibal took him to, he was from Carthage, came around and attacked Rome. It's this long story. Anyway, he's this big general. So Hannibal used biological weapons against the Romans. And the Romans freaked, all right, because elephants, when you got some weaponized elephants, you got some real shit there you got to deal with, because they basically put armor all over these elephants and put people up there in little houses that could shoot arrows down at you and gave them a shitload of arrows and said, go. And they were protected because it's hard to shoot arrows back up, right? The angle, especially on a big elephant like that. There isn't much you can do to poke an elephant with your spear and cause problems. If the elephant's walking around in a big, armored kind of a structure. It was leather and so on, but nonetheless, it had a lot of metal on it. Okay, and so the dogs were weaponized as well. Now, they had armor on them, and they had spikes and all of this kind of stuff, right? Okay, so here's the thing. In neither case did it in any way augment the ability of the biological organism to be more contagious, right? More effective. In fact, it actually reduces it to armor up animals. So the dogs couldn't run fast and this sort of thing. They were protected against getting poked, and so maybe they could get close and bite you, and you couldn't do much to them because of the spikes, but it doesn't really aid things. And that's kind of the way that we find that biological organisms in the form of viruses and these kind of things, bacteria and so on. So there are amoebic biological weapons, and they're very piss poor. It's hard to get an amoebic infection in a healthy person. There are bacterial biological weapons. Some of them are really nasty. If, for instance, some of these biological weapons, you got a shitload of it sprayed into your lungs, you would die real quick, right? But if it's just sprayed out in the air, you're not necessarily going to get any ill effect from it because of the natural immune system and how you deal with it and so on, and that you don't really you suck in bacteria all the time and you put them back out, and it doesn't really impact you, the healthy individual. This is what we find with all of these weaponized things. The real true thing they're trying to weaponize are virus. There's virus all over the place. They're looking at virus in the middle of in the bottom of the ocean and stuff now. But here's the thing about it. Yes, they can do one thing to the virus, and they can't make it any more contagious because there's these two things about the cell. It must be receptive, and it must be permissive to an attack by a virus. And that does not make any difference. The nature of the virus makes no damn difference. So whether it's COVID or whether it's Nipah, which supposedly has a 70% fatality rate, or whether it's smallpox, all of these require these two components of a cell in order to attack you, because all these fuckers are viruses. They're viri. Okay, so the viri must find a receptive cell, that is to say, a weak cell on the outer layer of it, weak electrically, weak structurally, a cell that probably should be cast off or anyway. It must find a receptive cell, and then that cell must be so weak that the internal controlling mechanism of that cell gives permission to the virus to use it for replication. These two conditions must be met. If either of them are absent, fuck it, that virus isn't going to hurt you at all. It'll be an environmental irritant. You can just spit it out, right? Gargle and you're good. So the woo about this is that you got these fuckers, the globalists, saying that they've weaponized smallpox. Well, they have made it more deadly should it find these two conditions, but they can't make it more contagious. They can sit there with those giant spray things and just spray this shit all over you, and you might suffer environmental damage that would weaken a cell. That might be their approach, right? So you're basically protected from the impact of the virus if you have cells that are neither receptive nor permissive. And you get these cells that way by keeping optimal vitamin D, optimal vitamin C, and taking chaga. Now here's the thing about chaga mushroom. It's the most studied medicinal mushroom out there. They've studied it for over 40 years. I'm talking lots of fucking scientists, because there's just incredible complex compounds in there that do things in a great way to the human body. And these scientists in these pharma labs want to tear it apart, find those things in there, replicate them, and make $1 bazillion selling them back to you in a concentrated form. And so far it hasn't worked, all right, because the nature of the compounds and the nature of the interrelationship of those compounds within this mushroom have made it extremely difficult for them to achieve these goals, although some have done just that. Some scientists have been able to extract some very meaningful compounds and are off with, little pharma companies doing this kind of thing. But in any event, though, so they've been studying this for 40 years. Chaga is readily available. It's called the cancer of the birch forest. I've done a lot of shows on chaga, and I'm not going to repeat myself about it, but the thing is that it's good at preventing cells from going either permissive or receptive. And it provides the body with this harmonization of an electrical output at a cellular level, at a network level, that the scientists do not know how it works. And they've been studying it for 40 years. A testament both to the complexity of chaga and to the stupidity of our scientists, right? That they don't quite grasp that there's something there that they don't quite grasp. Anyway, so I'm not particularly worried about the weaponized smallpox. As long as I maintain my body, they can weaponize and release all of the virus they want, and I'm essentially immune, because I take my chaga all the fucking time. It's called the mushroom of immortality for a really fucking good reason. And you can give it to kids. You can give this stuff to infants. You make a weak chaga tea and you give it to them. It's basically, it's a regulator. It provides the regulation component to your system. It regulates age your systems and regulating the immune system and all this kind of stuff. Plus, it's loaded with vitamins on its own. Vitamin D especially. It's a very good way to get vitamin D. Another thing about chaga, if you get the raw chunks, it's so good, they're dark, but if they're not dark enough, set them out in the sun for a while. Let the sun convert more of that material into vitamin D. It does the conversion and creation of vitamin D in chaga in a form that is the same way, nearly the same way, as the sunlight does in your skin with cholesterol. So it's very close to the molecules in your body. And here's something else. You cannot heal from allopathic chemicals. You cannot heal from any other material that is outside of your body in terms of its structure. So I can't heal from arsenic, right? You can do things with arsenic, it can cause certain conditions and so on, but I don't have arsenic as a rule circulating around in my system, so it's not something that I can heal with. You need those things that are within your body to be harmonious, or those things you're going to put in your body, you need to be harmonious with the chemicals that are already in your body in order for them to be effective and good for you. So you wouldn't eat sand, that kind of thing. There's reasons for this. Okay, so, all right, so that gets rid of the smallpox thing, Real quick, you go back, you can do a search and just put smallpox and chaga in the same search line, and you get lots of these things, because there's a lot of studies on the idea of using this ancient Siberian mushroom to prevent and cure diseases. And in that particular article, they mention Solzhenitsyn's book, Cancer Ward, off of which I based my Cancer Ward series on YouTube, which is still out there. Okay, so now, getting to more current things here. We're in this huge fog of woo now that we're in a more active war. We've seen the tide turn. We're in that first hour. The powers that be are starting to freak out a bit because they're seeing more and more people pile on to this tide turning, more and more digital soldiers coming out, more people discussing all of this, and things are happening. And so in this period of time, we can't be sure of anything because it's like a war. So I've actually seen that there are reports of Australian Army troops that are forcibly inoculating Aboriginal, indigenous tribal people in Australia and or putting them into quarantine camps, okay? But also out there are reports from people, Australian people, people claiming to be Australian, sure sound like it, saying that they are members of the Australian Defence Force and that they're not doing this, and that up in the Northern Territories, they think that there are people that have Australian Defence Force uniforms on that are not members of the military. That, in other words, these people are not regular military, they don't belong there, so this is the conspiracy, this is the woo coming on out. You got one video out there on some of the series where the woman is saying that, she describes the vehicles and so on, and says, the Australian military does not use these vehicles, even though these people coming out of them are indeed wearing something that's close to, or appears from a distance to be Australian military uniform. So we don't know. It's hard to say. Now, let's go to the Solomon Islands. So the Solomon Islands is in revolt, okay? Solomon Islands is nominally looked after by Australia. So Australia more or less runs Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands is a collection of islands that have been formed into a nation of more or less there's not a very widespread indigenous population within the Solomon Islands. So they're more or less all the same kind of people. But over the years, there's been all the influences of seafaring peoples and so on. So there's a diverse range of opinion. There are diverse people types in there and so on as a result of this confluence of events there from all of the seafaring people over all this time. But nonetheless, the social structure is very tribal. And you always, the Solomon Islands have tribal issues because tribes have conflicting needs at different times. And so you get into these tribal battle kind of things. The Solomon Islands are in revolt because all of the tribal people understood and have believed that the Australians are forcibly inoculating tribal people in Australia. And so they see the handwriting on the wall. It is not going to help that the Solomon Islands political structure appeals to the Australians to basically send in troops to put down the riots because the rioters are burning government buildings and banks and shit, right? They're burning infrastructure, the externally imposed Western infrastructure out of their tribal society, if you notice. And doing a pretty good job, really. But striking the bank was a good blow there. So the Solomon Islands is not a rebellion. It is truly a revolt. Now, will they have a revolution from that revolt? I don't know. Will Australia allow it? I don't know. Because Australia's going to have a real problem if these people decide that's it. We're not putting up with this shit. You can't get off the boats. We're going to start shooting at you, driving cars at you, whatever it takes to get you guys out of here with these damn needles. Because that's what they think is going on. That they're next. That Australia's going to come on in and forcibly kill all of them and so on. Now, so yet again, the fog of woo. The Solomon Islanders don't know that that's true or not true, that Australia intended to do that. But they're reacting because of what they don't know is true or not true, but is out there, that the Australian Defence Forces are inoculating Aboriginal people because they see all of this stuff. But is it actually Australian Defence Forces, or are we looking at a false flag in that sense? We don't know. This is the fog of the woo, and we're just into this first hour of the tide of the woo, right? Of the tide of this particular war. The pause has happened, the tide's flowing in, and it's going to just start building up and stacking up over this period of time. So, so basically it's like, okay, tribal people all over, they understand. They know this shit's coming. And so now it appears that we're looking at a schism in the awakening, a fracture that's going to fracture the population and bring over a lot more normies to the woo side as the tribal people decide that they are the point on this, right? That they know they're in the next target, in a big way. And so this extends to tribal people all around the planet. And so tribal people are just going to basically, I think, use this point in history as their opportunity to stand up and defend the tribe relative to the impressing of the globalists' derived structures and systems. So this is a point that Jean Baudrillard talked about. He was a postmodernist that everybody hates. All the progressive hate him because he said communism was stupid and it was dead in the 1920s, and it's only a bunch of limp dick, numbnut, brain dead fuckers that keep trying to pimp it out there. He was not a conspiracy guy to the extent that he should have been, and he didn't recognize that this is not a natural thing, that they keep pumping communism because it serves the globalist interest, not because humans like it or want to adopt it. Anyway, though, so we're at this point now the tide's starting to flow back in. It is my opinion that the globalists are going to drop a lot of the stuff they'd planned to do with climate change and go into aliens or UFOs. Now, the thing about it is that from a woo perspective, from an esoteric perspective, understanding that universe provides and guides, right? So it provided me with an illness that I might get knowledge, that I might be here with my big mouth to start talking and yelling about chaga just as all of this shit happens, right? That was something that universe wanted to do. It had that need. Did a lot of other shit to a lot of other people, right? Forced them out when under all kinds of circumstances. Not necessarily pleasant to any of us, but nonetheless it got its needs met because the universe provides and guides that way. So consider this idea then. Universe has provided us with UFOs. It's provided us with various kind of UFOs going way the fuck back in human history. It does this for its own purposes, providing those UFOs in order to guide us to certain things. During my lifetime, it has provided a shitload of UFO stuff in a way that it has not in the past. The problem that has arisen, that is one of my focuses now, is that the globalist, they don't want us looking at UFOs. Universe wants us to. It keeps sending those fuckers down here, wants us to get involved in this shit. It's not sending us this stuff to ignore. You know, don't look at that tree over there, you know. No, it puts the tree there so you can make a house out of it. And the globalists don't want us to examine UFOs. So you can ask yourself why, you can get involved in their intent and their motivation and so forth, or you can just say, fuck it. Okay, now I understand. Now I grasp as an initiated person, as someone who's been initiated into the idea of how to think about tides and this kind of thing and the woo and so forth, that, universe wants us to examine these. It's providing us with these flavonoids, these complex theoretical, thought flavonoids, UFOs, and it wants us to examine them because it keeps sending them to us. And so maybe we should stop and look at them. And the globalists don't want us to. So as I say, you can either get involved with their intent or you can just say, okay, fuck them, I understand now. Globalists can just go shit themselves over in a little corner there because I'm not going to pay attention to what they want anymore, and I'm going to examine UFOs because universe is sending them to me. Also, this should be true for all religious people. No matter what your religion is, examine the thought and just replace universe with God. Okay? So God is sending UFOs here for whatever reason. You must understand that that is the case, and you should decide that you want to interact with the idea at least and figure out, hey, what the fuck's going on? Anyway, though, so I think that that the globalists are going to skip the climate change shit, that's already eroded, wearing down on them in terms of its effect and its potential for galvanizing the populace the way they want. We're not particularly scared of it. And so I think they're going to jump right into the UFOs. And they may, get out there and say, we've released smallpox and all this kind of shit. I don't actually think that that's coming. I think that COVID is the disease they're stuck with, and this is the way it's going to go. There's all kinds of stuff about the UFOs, and we need to get into. And the UFOs actually, in a straightforward circle, so a straightforward roundabout, end up coming back to the globalists and the pedophiles and all of this sort of thing. So, and then we also need to discuss the Dark Knight satellite and what's going on with it. But this is too long and I've got stuff to do, so we'll have to leave that for another one. Anyway, so this is the Tides of Wu, and in the Tides of Wu, I'm not particularly concerned about smallpox. It's going to be a little freaky if they actually were to release it. They're going to threaten it, but it's going to be kind of hard to threaten people with smallpox when, A, there's been tons of people inoculated against it, and the inoculation of the old-style vaccines actually makes it so that you're neither receptive nor permissive. So you're immune for life. It was an actual immunization, unlike these drugs they're giving people against COVID. So anyway, as I say, I'm not particularly worried about smallpox. It tells me where they are at, the globalists, what they're doing, how they're freaking out. And it points to particular weaknesses and how we're going to be able to capitalize on those weaknesses as we go forward here further into the hump of the tide of Wu as the whole thing plays out. It might be years and years. We might be looking at this thing as a 20-year process, getting through all of this big war and all of this kind of stuff. So anyway, quite fascinating. Keep your health up. Keep in on your chaga. It's proof against more than just regular COVID. And consider now you've at least been initiated into how to look at tides.